My name is Angie Rylands, and I am an adoptive mom. I have 5 boys, and just recently, about 19 months ago, became a widow and a single parent of 5. My husband and I, when we first met, were not planning on having kids, so that's kind of the funny twist to our story, and God had very different plans for us, thankfully. So we began our family with a biological child, our youngest, who is now 12, and then when he was 6, we felt the call to adopt, which was out of left field, especially for me, and began researching. And fast forward 2.5 years, and we have 4 adopted sons from China. So that makes 5 boys, who currently are 12 to 19 in our family, and they are amazing. But as is very common, all come with individual stories, individual hardships. One of our sons in particular, I noticed, had more difficulty than the others had with early attachment. And having experienced in the adoption world professionally, I was state director for an adoption agency in South Carolina for a few years before my husband passed, and so I've had the blessing, I suppose, of more education than the average adoptive parent gets to have. And I knew that every child was unique, every child needs to take their own time, and they're going to settle into a family in different ways. But at about 10 months, I started to realize this doesn't seem to be getting any better. Not better for the family, not better for him. And I so want him to feel safe here. I want him to feel comfortable. I want him to feel welcomed and loved, and just have that sense of belonging. And he would occasionally articulate that he didn't feel that way, but mostly it was just by observation of behavior. Guardedness, not willing to really kind of let his hair down and laugh and enjoy and just be a kid. It was harder for him to do that, harder for him to trust, harder for him to develop friendships with his peers. He would say that it was because his English wasn't good enough and he was embarrassed to speak to people. But now looking back, I see that was a wall that he used because he had larger trust issues at play. I'd say at about 18 months, he finally started to let some of those walls down, developed a closer bond with my husband initially than he did with me. And very tragically, about 6 months after that bond began to form, my husband died suddenly of cancer. And so you can imagine how devastating that was for all of us. We had very little warning. It was 5 weeks from diagnosis to his passing. And this boy in particular initially shut down when Tom would talk to the boys about his prognosis, and when he sat down and talked to them about God's plan for their futures and how that wasn't going to involve him being with them, and really try to prepare them to see God's hand in it all. I would find him laying on the floor, staring at the ceiling, not able to engage with his dad. And I worried. I remember thinking, oh, I don't want him to go backwards. We've come so far. And Tom reassured me. He said, honey, he's going to be fine. Just trust me, he's going to be okay. And there was a lot that neither one of us knew at that time. After Tom's passing, this son did a 180-degree turn and became quite literally the definition of the perfect child for a season. He was determined to honor his father by honoring me. He was determined to step in where some of his other brothers were being irresponsible and be the responsible one, to be the role model, to be the helper. That was his way of coping. That was something he could control. And I didn't understand at the time just how desperately he had to control his surroundings. I didn't understand a lot of the underlying demons and trauma that he was wrestling with because he had not opened up about them at that point. So Tom died in July, and that following March, there was a knock on my bedroom door about 11 o'clock at night, and I was just preparing for bed, and he came in and asked if we could talk. And I said, sure. We had gotten very close and we were talking a lot then, and I said, what's up? And he sat on my bed and in a completely emotionless tone of voice began to recount years of severe abuse that he suffered at the hands of an older foster brother in his home in China, his foster home in China. And it's one of those moments where you take a deep breath and you pray in your heart just really fast, okay, God, don't let me blow this. Don't let me say the wrong thing. Give me the words. Let me not make this worse. And so we had a brief conversation, and I didn't prod too much, but I let him know that I was grateful that he trusted me with that was a really big deal, that he had not done anything wrong, and that I was so grateful that he was in a safe place. And I tried to keep it very upbeat as much as I could. But I did notice very quickly the lack of connection that his words had with any emotion. There were no tears, there was no anxiety, no anxiousness. It was as if he was reading a story off of the back of a cereal box. Just another story to tell. And that broke my heart. I remember saying to a friend shortly thereafter that the things that he's experienced, the things that he's endured, we really shouldn't have words for. There shouldn't be words to describe that kind of horror that kids can be subjected to. And I remember being so angry enough to hide in my bedroom at times so that my kids didn't see me so mad, so that I didn't take it out on them, and just asking why in the world. Why couldn't I have been there to protect him? All of the things that we can't control as adoptive parents. And yet knowing that this was the start of some pretty important decisions and some pretty important developmental milestones for him. Grateful that he finally was able to get this out, and not really sure what was coming next. But I was absolutely certain that he wasn't okay, despite the facade that he put on, despite the words, the reassurance from him that he was fine. This was in his past. He just thought I needed to know. It seemed like the right thing to tell me. It was very nonchalant. This was the middle of March 2016. By April 15th, my son was being led out the front door in handcuffs by a sheriff's deputy going to an acute care hospital. In a matter of 4 weeks, he had gone from being the perfect child, knowing that there is no such thing, to being completely out of control. It was like looking at the same streetwise, need-nobody kid that we picked up in China. And I felt all 3 years of our attachment and all of our efforts just being flushed down the drain as I watched him go out the door. And I literally collapsed against the wall and fell to the ground. And as my girlfriend came over to try to help me, I remember saying to her that watching my husband's flag-draped body go out that door was not as hard as what I just had to witness. Because he was living out a hell that he didn't ask for. And that was really hard to watch. Harder than the hateful words, harder than the do what you want, Mom, I don't need you, this is all your fault. All of the things that came after, all of the darts that were thrown, were not as hard as watching the child that I knew was in there being suppressed by someone that was fighting for his life. He was in the hospital for 9 days and then came home for a while. Things were rocky, lots of walking on eggshells, all of the other boys just trying not to upset him. Getting nervous if I had to discipline him for something or say something or remind him to do something. Everybody's sort of bracing themselves for how is he going to react. In fact, I remember one day my youngest son running down the stairs after I had spoken to his brother, and he was like, "Oh, Mom, I was afraid he was going to blow up." And that's when I realized just how much living in this RAD tornado was affecting all of the boys. It wasn't just about the child who had suffered and me. at all. We were all living it and breathing it and afraid of it. And we didn't even know what it was. And it was then that I started to realize that this wasn't typical teenage rebellion, though I think there was some of that in there. I began to realize that we had the perfect storm of trauma and loss and abuse, teenage rebellion, and tremendous grief. And it all came together in one major storm. And everybody that was within, spitting distance was going to have a problem. The year went on. We ended up having 2 more hospitalizations that stemmed from him running away, threatening suicide, jumping out second-story windows with a knife, having to call the police. Things that I just never envisioned, ever, that would be part of my life. And in the midst of all of that, the questions of, why now? Why by myself? Why am I doing this alone? Do you really think I can handle this, God? Because I'm not feeling like I have as much to offer as you obviously think I do. And not being able to fix any of it.